Welcome to Ink and Magic, a podcast where we read and discuss the writing craft, world building, and romance of paranormal and fantasy novels.
If you love books with bite, set in worlds of magic and mayhem, then you're in the right place. My name's Nikisha Shanae. I go by Ines.
And I'm Leslie. I write as Elle Penelope. And welcome to the show.
Hey, Les. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And today I'm super excited because we have another celebrity guest.
We only have celebrities on this show. We have no average Janes or Joes on this show.
Sorry to disappoint you.
Yes. But you guys are going to be so excited with our conversation today with Sacha Black, who is a best-selling and competition-winning author. I can attest to that. She's a rebel podcaster, a speaker, and casual rule breaker. She writes writing craft books for authors and spicy sapphic fantasy romance as Ruby Rowe. She lives in Cambridgeshire, England with her wife and genius giant of a son. Hi, Sacha.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
We are so excited to have you here. Sacha wrote a book that I'm obsessed with. 10 steps. 10?
13.
13. Of course, because it's the evil number. 13 steps to a villain. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I need to have lots and lots and lots of conversations with Sacha because I'm really interested in villains. I'm really interested in what makes them tick. Because sometimes, especially in like dark romance, people want the villain to be the hero. And that's fascinating to me.
Fantasy romance. A lot of these, dark elves and the Hades Persephone of it all. Like that's all over fantasy romance. So it's very on brand.
And I think there's a reason for that right now.
Ooh.
Yeah. And I think it's because if you look at society, a couple of years ago when we were in the pandemic, everybody wanted escapism, happy positivity. So that's sort of where we had this second explosion of cozy, right? So that's why cozy mysteries and cozy fantasy came to the fore. But now we're out of that and everybody feels safe in their environment. We're seeing this explosion of dark romance and dark heroes and dark villains because we're physically safe. So for escapism, we're able and feel safe enough to explore that darker side of ourselves.
I love it.
Right? Break it down.
Okay. That's fascinating. That makes complete sense. But tell us what. So I like that we have this notion of villains, of antagonists, and antiheroes. But let's start with a villain. Like, what is a villain? Because I was always taught that a villain is just an antagonist, that it is just a person who is in opposition to the hero's goal. But I think it's more than that.
For me, I like to have a more nuanced definition because I think when you're writing as a career, you want to explore more depth and more like intricacy in your novels. You don't want to just write the same thing over and over again. So whilst, technically that is correct, for me, I have it more on a continuum. So for me, a villain is the real evil end of darkness, bad acts, the conflict, complete opposition to a hero, but also perpetrating violence, bad acts. Then in the middle, you've got the antagonist who isn't necessarily evil or, doing violent things, but is still in conflict and opposed, whether it be morally, psychologically, physically, goal-wise to the hero. And then on the far end, you've got anti-heroes who are somewhere in the middle. They don't change because the bit of them that needs to stay consistent is the bad bit. If you lose that in their character arc, they're no longer an anti-hero, they're a flawed hero. So anti-heroes make better choices by the end of the books or by the end of the films, right? But they still, am I allowed to say naughty words?
Yes.
Okay, but at the end of the movie, they're still an asshole. They're still, or they're a little bit selfish still, or, whatever. So that's kind of how I differentiate because it enables me to create more character depth if I have that differentiation between what they are. And also, I think when you look at different genres, you're more likely to get one or two of those, but not the other one necessarily.
Interesting.
Yeah, I like that. So go on.
I'm just wondering, can I have, I know we're all just like, can I have all three of those in one book?
Yeah, I don't see why not.
That's okay. That's all I wanted to know with that. Go on, Leslie.
I'm wondering if a villain can be redeemed, or does that make them an antagonist if by the end they've been redeemed in some way?
I think is that villain a protagonist? Because what you'll find is that if the villain is a protagonist in the sense of movies like The Joker or Cruella, for example, those two movies recently, while they're still evil at the end, they have a kind of character arc that at least makes us empathize with them and connect with them. So Regina, the evil queen in Once Upon a Time, is a fantastic example of somebody who was a villain and then gets redeemed. Now, she actually does change. Like, I would not class her as a villain character anymore at the sorry, also spoiler warning, at the end of Once Upon a Time. I don't think she's a villain anymore because she's actively trying to do good. So it's a really good question. I'm trying to think of an example, because I would say that villain protagonists are almost like archetypes and characters in and of themselves that are separate entities to villains who maintain their villainy, if you like, all the way through the film, because you have to do certain other things with villains who are protagonists to make them work as a character as the protagonist.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
So I can give you a couple of examples of those things if you want.
Sure.
Okay, so we all the problem that you have with a villain who is a protagonist is that they are essentially innately a bad person. So how do we, who like to see ourselves as morally good and just people, connect with or identify with a character who is morally unjust and perpetrating bad crimes or whatever? It's very, very difficult to do that. But there are certain things that you can do. So, for example, we all know the concept save the cat. For listeners who don't know, it's essentially where your hero does something that's heroic, like literally air quotes saving a cat at the beginning of the movie. I see a very repeatable pattern in villain protagonists where they do what I call a reverse save the cat. This is not an official term, I'm just making it up, but I think it works. So instead of the villain doing something positive, because that's out of character for them, what the authors and writers do is make something really bad happen to the villain so that we feel sorry for them. And that's an instant connection with the villain in a way that is authentic, because we empathize and sympathize with the character whilst not actually validating their bad behavior in our own kind of moral conscience. So examples of that include in Cruella the movie, her mum dies really early on. She gets chased by dogs. She's then homeless and in London by herself as a kid. Immediately, that's like bam, 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 three things. We feel really bad for her. We're connected to her, and we justify her bad, in air quotes, actions. In Joaquin Phoenix's Joker movie, he gets beaten up within about 3 minutes of the film straight away, just for trying to do his job, where he's swinging the what's it called, like the sandwich
sign.
board. He's swinging the sign. He's just trying to do his job. He gets beaten up. We then see his home life is terrible. We see that he can't get his meds, and so all of a sudden, bam, 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 he's in this really poor, awful situation, which, while we don't agree with his actions, does in our mind give enough of a cotton wool blanket to justify his behavior, and we sympathize with that like poor thing that's happening. Even Deadpool, who is an anti-hero in the most classic way, he gets is it him that gets sick? It's him, isn't it?
Yeah, he gets
cancer right at the beginning of the film. Boom, straight away something bad happens to him. Although he has both, because he also has a save the hero moment, even though it's kind of on the edge, where he doesn't like murder the boy. He just scares the poop out of him right at the beginning of the movie. So he kind of has both, which I think is really interesting, given that an anti-hero is like 50-50. But anyway, I've rabbited on for ages. Sorry.
No, that's fantastic. And I have a name for it. Sympathy for the devil. That's what reverse the cat is. It's sympathy for the devil.
And
I love that.
Sympathizing with the character, I think it's like, if it's a villain who is textured and layered and three-dimensional, who is just not, traditional mustache twirling, the audience needs to have some measure of sympathy, some moment of empathy for them in order to it just makes it a better story, I think, when you have something that goes into why they are the way they are. Again, even though we can't
100%.
justify their actions. Yeah.
The other thing that you need is someone worse than them, because a villain still needs a villain. As a protagonist, you still need that opposing force. So you have to have somebody who is worse than them, which is almost a real exercise in skill as a writer, because how do you take something that's already villainous and kind of take it to the extreme while still making it 3D and, you know, not one-dimensional.
And then that villain is more one-dimensional. Like, they're not going to have the same empathy. You can't have two.
Yes, exactly. They are going to be more one-dimensional, but that's why I say it's like a hard skill, because as writers, obviously, we still want to try and make them seem 3D. And you know, the way that you do that really is about their motivation. Look, what's their goal and what's their reason why they're doing it. And if you've got that, that's enough, because we're focused on like the main character. Because, you know, villain protagonists, in my opinion, are some of the most complex and difficult characters to master, because of their web of like mix of behavioral duality, I suppose.
Wow, mine is just blowing. One of the things that I remember from your book is you talking about how villains are written by heroes, because we as the writers, we love the hero. We see ourselves as the hero. And so a lot of times we're revealing the villain through the hero's eyes. And what you talk about, what you just said about the goals, the motivations, and the conflicts, I think we don't think about that so often, because we are so hero forward. Most of us are so hero forward. And I don't know, I'm just wondering, like, should we be sitting down doing character profiles for the villains? And then how would that differ?
I think every writer needs something different. Some people are really intuitive and they don't need to write it down, because it sort of comes to them. Maybe they have a set of strengths that are more like emotional strengths or whatever. And so maybe it comes to them more intuitively. For me, I do have to think about it. I do have to think, for me, the key is, what is the villain's wound? And because all of the time we think about the hero's wound, we're like looking into the hero's past, and we always forget that actually, if you want a hero with a complex story, a complex character arc, you need a villain with a complex story and a complex character arc to match it. Otherwise, you've got a mismatch and you'll just make the villain seem one-dimensional. So for me, the no-brainers are like, what is that villain's backstory? And I really struggle with this, because like, for those who nerd out about Clifton's strengths, context is like my 33. So I actually have to really consciously work on this for my characters. So I have to figure out like, what caused the villain to get to where they are? Like, what was that story? What were the like inciting factors in that person's past? Because because humans in general are nice people. Like, we don't become these villains because of one thing that happened to us. It's usually a sequence of events that's led us to that. It's like the compounding effect that then leads us to make poor decisions, because, you know, the inner child rewires and decide and is trying to protect us. So that's the difference between a hero and a villain, is that the villain makes bad decisions, the hero makes good decisions, right? So I have to know that path. What led them to that point? And why do they make those decisions? If I know that, then I don't necessarily have to do a huge profile, but I do have to know what was the wound or the wound sequence, and what is their goal, and what is their motivation? Why are they doing it?
Yeah, I think you call that in your book, their soul scars.
Yeah.
I like that. That's the wound, their soul scars. And you talk about how they have the soul scars and the negative traits, which starts to be that lie that they believe that leads them to the bad decisions that they make. I love that formula that you put up there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think we think about it naturally with heroes, but we always forget to do the same work on our villain.
I know that when I get stuck a lot of times, it's because I don't know the villain's motivation. And then I have to go back. I don't necessarily do a character profile for them, but I'll do the motivation and sort of what's their plan. And, I need to know their, like, logistically where they are, what they're doing, even if it's off screen, because usually the villain is off screen for most of it until they come into conflict with the protagonist. And yeah, it's like, I think I'll know, but I start intuitively. And then when I get stuck, a lot of the times it's because I need to dig deeper into that. And that's just that's the kind of writer that I am as a, like, super plotter.
The other thing that's like a really interesting exercise that you can do is to ask the characters around a villain what they think of the villain. So you could ask, like, the hero, you could ask the hero's ally, but actually you can ask, like, for want of a better word, the henchman, or the villain's mother, or the villain's sibling, or, you can ask those characters around them. And even if you just do it as a thought exercise rather than, like, actually spending the time writing stuff down, if you, like, we use that trick in story all of the time to sway the reader to a certain opinion by letting side characters express their opinions about character X or Y. So you can do that same exercise with a villain. Like, if you ever get stuck and, like, you're struggling to write it down or figure out what the motivations are, ask other characters what their experiences are of that person, because no two characters should have the same opinion about the villain, just like no two characters have the same opinion about the hero, right? Because all of the relationships are different. We have like the BFF, the oldest person who you're most self with, and you can walk around your house in your pants or whatever, and then you've got somebody who's a work colleague who's a professional, and they're only going to see, like, one layer out of you or whatever. And then you've got the friends who you only play sports with, who you scream in their helmets, and, like, you slap their butts as they walk onto the pitch, but you wouldn't do that to your Auntie Doris, like. So it's all of, like, it's trying to get into that villain's psyche from all the different angles, because they are multifaceted, and that's what we forget.
So one other thing that you talk about is villain archetypes. And Harry Potter, the book, has a lot of villains and a lot of archetypes within there. I remember Lord Voldemort. He was omnipotent and power hungry. And then there was the arch nemesis kind of villain. That was Draco Malfoy. And then we can just keep going down the line, like Bellatrix Lestrange, whatever her name is. Lestrange. I can't get it right. She was more like a lunatic kind of villain. I just thought all of these were so interesting. And even the Dursleys, they were villains as well. They were kind of like the jealous bit of villains. So it just goes to show that even within, we think about this one-dimensional kind of character, there's still so many different types of villains within there.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like if you had, so we have, like, the positive theme of a story, right? But actually you've got the reverse of that, which the villain really should embody. But just as we have, like, side characters that thematically circle the hero and the hero's representation of the theme, those kind of side characters for the villain thematically circle him or her or them. So for me, it just helps me to consciously find characters to explore those, like, negative theme elements as well as the positive theme elements. And that's sort of why I did it. Like, I really like systems and structures. Like, as much as I hate, right? Like, as much as I don't put me in a box, right? But I'm going to put my characters in one. Yeah. So that's sort of why I do it, because I need to be able to point at a thing, because then it I don't know, it just makes it easier for me to write, I think.
And I even, like, reading through this, I do not like writing villains. I like writing antagonists. All of, like, the Harry Potter villains feel too one-dimensional for me. And I love the way that it's broken down, and they are different in their one-dimensionality. They have different aspects of it. But for me, just writing, it's more interesting to take someone who's an antagonist who might do evil things, but also show that layer of humanity, that layer of empathy, and it just complicates things a lot more.
Right. And so that's just reminded me, narrative separation is like one of the most important tools as a writer, where we separate what the antagonist or the villain is saying and doing in text, and then what they're narrating narratively, like in between the reader and the character. So whilst they might say, oh, you know, you're a dick or whatever out loud, that's terrible, you don't ever do that, but on their inside, that, you know, they'll be having that conflicting emotion that actually shows their humanity. And that's one of the ways that we can do that. And I completely agree that that is so important, but it's important for villains or antagonists. Well, for a villain protagonist, it's really important. Less important if they're just a villain. But yes, for the antagonist as well, certainly if it's like dual point of view in romance or whatever, that is so key, because that's how the reader then will connect with that character too, because we feel like the writer is letting us in and we're having a secret with that character, because we really know them, even if the other characters don't know them, we do, right? So like, it's such a good tool to make the readers feel, I don't know, important, special.
And that's one of the things we talked about in a previous episode about single POV, especially with a dark romance. When you don't get that, you don't get in their head to get that feeling. That's why I'm not drawn to dark romance, especially single POV, because dual POV is much easier, more palatable, because the author is able to give me those hints behind their behavior, behind their speech, that they really do have some softness, or they have some vulnerability that they're not letting show. But yeah, the POV choices can make a big difference in that as well.
Yeah. Oh, I completely agree. And you can almost play with that as well to try and create voice, where one character, maybe the character who's openly more positive, has less like narrative, what's the word, like it spends less time in their head narratively and gives more outwardly, and then the character who's like the brooding, mysterious, slightly morally grey has a lot more in the narrative, a lot more what's the word, I can't,
like inner monologue.
Yes, not necessarily in the italics, but in like the narrative prose, essentially, they spend more time in their head with the reader, because that's where they make that connection, because all of their outward actions are brooding and mysterious and
right.
You know, eyebrow raised and leaning against the door.
So here's my question, Sacha. So in like a standalone, or not even a standalone, where there's like a one villain in the book, it makes sense to me. Okay, hero comes at this, and a villain. Hero comes at this villain, defeats them. But in a longer series like a Harry Potter, where you have the same villain for all these books, like, how do you have any advice for how to keep it going? Because we keep coming up against the same villain who has the same backstory, but we keep coming at him and we don't completely defeat him. Like, how can we carry on a villain through a series?
So I mean, it's kind of the same as you do with a hero, right? The hero gets more complex. They complete different character arcs, right? So just as the hero sort of overcomes that, maybe their first, you know, flaw is that they're a little bit selfish, right? They're a little bit reluctant. So book one, they overcome their selfishness and they overcome their reluctance. Book two, maybe then they have to take up the role of leader, right? So they're still learning to become a leader. Book three, then they have to, if it's a trilogy, for example, they then have to, you know, do the fighting and actually you know, motivate other people. So it's then like an external thing. You can have the same layers with a villain, right? Maybe book one, they're more of like a Draco Malfoy type. They're just antagonists, rivals. They haven't necessarily been pushed to the edge, right? Then in book two, they're complete, or at the end of book one, you know, they're knocked off the edge. And so then book two becomes their descent into villainy, right? So they're perpetrating bad acts, but they're not necessarily as bad as their grand master plan. So this is just one way of doing it, right? And then in book three, they're then perpetrating all the violence or the really bad acts. So you can have that slow build of villainy, but it's just a descent rather than an angle up. Yeah. And then, or you can just explore, you know, just like try fail cycles with writing and trying to write full time. One series doesn't necessarily work. So one of their plans might not work. So if you've got a villain who's resilient, they're going to try something else. And then, but what you do is you raise the stakes and you just have like lower level petty fighting or whatever to begin with, and then it becomes a slightly more personal dig, and then it becomes, you know, maybe that physical contact. It's almost like the 12 stages of intimacy, but the 12 stages of violence.
Oh, I love it.
Because that's kind of what you need to do.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. You need to write that 12 stages of violence. That's your next nonfiction book.
I'm gonna have to go in and think about that now.
And also what she does in Harry Potter actually is the villain is weak and slowly gains strength over the
Yes.
course of the book. So you're facing the underbosses, you know, and then you get to the big boss later on who is continues to grow in strength.
Just like Super Mario Brothers, right? It's exactly, it's like a level up.
If you gamify it,
Yeah.
you don't get to the big boss. I mean, Marvel did this too with whatever his name was. I always forget his name. Thanos, yes.
Yeah.
You didn't even see him for like 5 or 6 movies. I don't know how many movies it took to get to him, but he was behind the scenes, you know. So I think there's lots of different ways you can do it to progress, to keep raising the stakes, like Sacha said.
Yeah, and the other thing is you can have the villain causing problems without even being on page. So like you can have the hero having to overcome something that was caused by the villain, but tangentially. And so then you still can have references to the villain and other character opinions about the villain without the villain even being on page. And so you then don't even have almost villain stakes in terms of that embodied tangible character until later, after they've gotten over that initial you know, a rumor. I'm just thinking like Gossip Girl, how many of the characters cause conflict and problems just by a rumor that was set off by so and so who said something, you know, blah blah blah. So yeah.
Speaking of Thanos, he's a fascinating villain because you're right. He did grow in power. But then what really got me with him is that his argument because they did what you did what you told them to do, Sacha.
I know, right?
They gave him a really plausible argument for why he was doing what he was doing. And then they also showed some of his backstory and his wound. And they even gave us sympathy they did all this stuff. And let me put some adjectives in my words. So they showed they gave him the backstory where he saw people in his world who were like crowded and they couldn't get things to eat. He had a strong argument of like, if we just cut the population by half, it's going to help everybody. And then also we saw the sympathy for the devil where he had to, spoiler alert, sacrifice his child in order to get the thing that he thought was the right thing to do.
Yep.
And does that make him a villain or an antagonist? Like, to me, it's not evil. I don't think his goal was evil. I mean, yes, half the people were gone, but because you have so much empathy for him, because he had a reason, you see his wound, it's not just villainy for villainy sake.
I think he's just a very well created villain. I think because he tries to get rid of half of the universe, that is a mass killing on a very significant level. I don't think we can say he's anything other than a villain. But I see your point, and I hear what you're saying about the fact that he has that human side, but I think that is just the quality of a very well done villain with a little bit more page time than the average villain. And when that happens, we can get that kind of understanding. But I mean, you look at Agent Smith, right, in the Matrix, also has the backstory, and also, well, less backstory, but we get that kind of manifesto and speech on why he's doing what he's doing. And he's doing it because he thinks that he's right and he's doing the right thing for everybody, which is what every villain does, right? Because every villain is the hero of their own story.
Yeah.
And I actually think the marker of a fantastic villain is when we agree with, even just for a split second, with what they're saying. Like, and I think that was the moment that I fell in love with villains, was when I was like 15 watching The Matrix for the first time. And Agent Smith was like, oh, humans are a virus like on the earth. And I was like, wow, shit.
Like,
And I was
sound
like, oh
right.
my God. Yeah, because for one split second, like it completely changed my frame of mind. No, my frame of
A
reference.
reference.
Yeah, to like the whole of everything I knew. And you know, Thanos in a way does that for a lot of people, because for half a second you can't deny that he has a point, right?
Yeah,
But
and then, I mean,
yeah,
it shows in the movie, like, the whales come back or whatever, like, the earth heals, and it's
yep.
kinda right, even in this villainy. I
Well,
mean,
look at what happened during the Schmandemic and how
yes.
the Earth healed then. I mean, you know, are any of
Yeah.
these villains wrong? 'Cause Agent
Man.
Smith said the same thing. But
And
yeah, so I mean, that is one of my favorite things, is when a writer can create that kind of manifesto that we jaw drop over, because it's using extreme logic, um, written in a way that we've not heard before, kind of thing. And that it's that they masterpieces, both of their kind of manifesto speeches.
another one who's like that is Killmonger, famously. Like, people still will argue over Killmonger was right. And it's like he was right, and there's this one little thing, people were following him, and then he started saying, "Yeah, we'll kill their children." And we're like, "Okay, hold on, sir." But like, up until then, we were, many, many people to this day are just like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't see the problem."
Killmonger's point, for you weirdos who haven't seen Black Panther, Killmonger's point was that the Wakandans, they had a responsibility to come outside of Wakanda and help other people that look like them, because they were hurting and they were suffering. And Killmonger was a complete example of someone who was hurt and suffering. And even beyond that, someone who was hurt and suffering because of Wakandans. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, you got his backstory as a child, as a prince of Wakanda that was
The
abandoned.
empathy was like off the charts.
And isn't it funny that in the end he was right and they did do what he said, because it has started to, like,
Ouch!
isn't that
Yeah.
like the most,
It was just brilliant writing.
yeah, it is brilliant. It kind of blew my mind. I was like, wow, shit.
I can't
Yeah.
believe you got me thinking about how Agent Smith is right. I'm still not over that.
True, though. Like, I have a Matrix tattoo. I'm a Matrix stan, and I do remember that moment in the first time I saw it, and every time since then, where you're like, yes, this man, quote unquote man, has a real point, and you can see that in humanity, and that those are my favorite villains. I think everyone feels the same way, where you really can connect with them, and you can see it kind of says that anybody could potentially turn into a villain in the same way we like to see ourselves as heroes. There is something that maybe it's not comforting, but there's something very human about thinking that, there but for the grace of God go I. Like, if my logic is pushed to the limit, if something else happened to me, then would I have that extreme point of view? Would my logic get pushed to that level?
And it's a really good question to ask yourself of your both protagonist and your villain. Like, what would it take to turn this hero into a villain? What would it take to turn
Mm.
this villain into a hero? And they're great questions to ask, like how, and I actually think it would take more to turn a villain into a hero than it would to turn a hero into a villain. And that's how fine a line the hero treads, which is what I think is so, I don't know, maybe you guys disagree, but I think it's easier to make somebody evil than it is to turn somebody who's already evil good.
Oh yeah, I agree. And I think that if we push that line further, like, I'm thinking of the story that I'm plotting right now, which is a sci-fi thriller. Like, when you're told to beat up your characters more and to make things harder for them. And I've started thinking, as I'm planning out their goals and what they want, thinking about what's the worst thing that can happen to them based on their wound and their fear, and then try to make it happen, or as close to that as possible. And their reaction to that is what determines whether they're a hero or a villain. When you're out at the all is
100%.
lost and what you do, yeah. So those make for super interesting stories, I think.
Yeah, and I really like seeing those moments, like, of the villain as well. Like when the villain got to that same, because the villain's already been through this, like
Mhm.
that journey of the hero, right? The hero's journey that we see in the book, the villain has already done, and the villain made the wrong choice. That's why they're the villain in this story. And that's why I like origin stories so much, because they get to explore, like, if the hero turns, well, if the hero turns right when they have that Dark Knight moment choice and the villain turns left, that's the origin story. It's like a thematic play on the opposite result, which I just find fascinating. I love an origin story.
Yeah, and we don't get as many negative arcs, negative character arcs as positive, just like culturally, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, having what's the point in sort of a negative character arc where they turn the wrong way and it becomes a villain origin story. I watched Saltburn recently. I don't know if you've seen that, but
I haven't. It's on my list, but like I heard a couple of the scenes and was like, I'm not sure.
yeah,
I was not sure
it's
if I
very
wanted to watch it.
polarizing. I mean,
Yeah.
I loved it, but I understand why many people didn't. I would say definitely to Ines, she wouldn't like it. I know her enough to know that it's not for her. But
I'm gonna try. I am gonna try it, but I just need to just psych myself up for it because I know what I'm going in for.
yeah, it's a lot, but it's great. And it is an origin story of sorts. I'm not going to spoil anything. I don't think there's anything to spoil, but and just seeing the turn, and that it's a very different kind because that's a character who I don't think would ever have been a hero, but maybe in other circumstances. But yeah, just watching that and seeing how the steps, that moment where they make that decision, kind of the point of no return, where maybe
is
they
that
could
where
have
the
turned
decision
back.
is? I'm interested in that. So in a negative character arc, so we have our dark moment. Is that point of no return for a villain?
Yeah. I think it's the corresponding moment. And that's what I mean. Like at the dark night and of the soul or whatever you want to call it, the dark moment, the hero makes the right choice and finds that little piece of resilience to go, okay, I'm going to make the right choice. I'm going to keep fighting. The villain basically has a paddy and goes, wow, fuck this. I'm, fuck everybody. I'm now going to, do whatever I want because nothing matters anyway. And so they make the choice our inner 4-year-old would want to make.
Wow, that's so fascinating. Here's my other question, Sasha, because we're all romance authors. So I'm really interested in how, so in romance, we talk about the fun and games moment, those falling in love moments. And I'm just sitting here thinking, how does a heroine, if the villain is a hero, or if the villain is, if we have hero and heroine as well, how does one of the lovers fall for that hero villain or that anti-hero? I think like in terms of like the 3 dates in a disaster, right? So what does that look like? Because is the villain actively trying to get the other lover to fall for them? And like, what does that look like if they're just have all these negative traits?
Do you mean, because I don't read a huge amount of dark romance, do you mean like in a dark romance where
No, I mean in romance, well, yes, but in romance period, we have those moments of like they're walking along the beach hand in hand, or he orders food for her and it's her favorite, or they go out dancing, those little montagey moments where you can see they're falling in love with each other?
How does it happen?
That's the hero. What does that look like for a villain?
Okay. So I think I understand what you're saying. It's a couple of things. The first thing is a villain will always, so a villain protagonist will have someone, something, some even object in an extreme circumstance, but usually a person, animal, or thing, where they show humanity to it. They show some level of kindness. In a romance, for whatever reason, that is always the love interest. And so they'll take this very extreme, different behavior towards that protagonist. Hopefully it's justified. And so then they become the villain's special snowflake. So they will then get to see the human side of the villain, and it's showing, you got to show those human moments, and then you have to juxtapose that against the violent, bad nature, which is pushed outwards towards all of the other characters. So if you've got the villain, they're pushing like the nice human behavior towards the heroine, and then all of the bad behavior externally. And of course, we've got extreme dark romances where there's also negative behavior, but they'll have shown enough of the positive behavior that the heroine or the hero or whoever is dating who will be like, oh, but I know that you're like this. It's like that I know that you're different, you're special, they've seen enough to know that they can change them. They can change them.
but because it's a villain, they don't change them.
No, they just get let into like the villain's inner circle. And so just like with loyalty and a classic villain, once you're inside that villain's inner circle, they'll burn the world down for you, right? And so they don't then send any of that negative behavior to the heroine. And negative is in air quotes, because depending on you as a reader and what you feel is negative, like there are certain things in dark romance that you may feel are negative, but the protagonist doesn't, right? And so I'm talking about power dynamics or whatever in the bedroom. So and so it has to be very careful. The perception of the villain protagonist has to be very carefully controlled by the heroine or the love interest. And that's why it's so important that we do see some of that narrative inner voice and explanation about how the heroine feels about the hero, the villain hero. So like just to be explicit for a second, anyone that's listening that doesn't like explicit stuff, if you've got a darker sexual scene, but the heroine is enjoying herself in the same way that what was it, Sympathizing with the Devil, where we see like the bad thing happening to the villain, it's that same connection, because her enjoyment of it justifies the behavior, even if morally we don't necessarily agree with it. That's why psychologically it works.
Wow.
Remember,
you just unlocked it in my head.
There was this book, I think we both read, and as long time ago, I was like an alien romance, where the descriptions of the sex scenes made it seem like the heroine was in pain, and she was not. Like, I don't know, I think I shared it with you, and I was like, this really turned me off, because the same scene when she's enjoying it is fine, but this act when it was written so that it sounded very painful, and I was like, ooh, no, not hot, not sexy. And you could read the same exact thing when she's into it. It's a totally different experience.
And that's why, like, if even in erotica where you have like masochistic, that's why masochism works, right? Because even though there's pain there, the person's enjoying it, right? And I suppose that line is slightly more difficult to tread with sadism, but the principle is there, the enjoyment is there, and therefore that validates the behavior. And obviously we're not like yucking anybody's yum or anything, we're just talking about the psychology of what works and what doesn't work. I don't know how one would write a scene where somebody's in pain in a sexual environment and make that work. Like, I don't know how, I don't have experience to do that, to know how that would work. I'm sure there are people out. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, you've got to enjoy the pain for me to understand how that works. I've never tried to deconstruct a scene where like, for example, non-con, I'm not sure how that works because I don't read it, I don't write it, and I haven't deconstructed it. But I know that works for some people. But yeah, I don't have the experience to know how that works.
Yeah, I think it only works when, well, the non-con I've read is like fake non-con. Like at the end, you find out, oh, and they really you set this up all.
So it's dub-con.
Yeah, it ends up being dub-con. That's kind of you think is non-con at first.
Yeah.
I think it's not going to work in a romance because most romances are written for women's pleasure, and if a woman is not going to, most women don't find pleasure in non-consent. Like there's a part of them that has to consent to it, that wants it. So if it's not any of that, and if it's outside of our genre, then it's rape, it's force, it's assault. And
yeah, and obviously there are lots of people who, survivors who do find like some reading that therapeutic and things.
Yeah,
that's way out of my remit in terms of craft and understanding how to do that and to do it justice and to do it effectively and properly. I don't know the craft of that is all that I'm saying.
Yeah, neither do we. But I think we have helped a lot of people. We have certainly unlocked some stories that was not on my publishing schedule this year that I now want to write.
Uh-oh.
Damn you, Sasha.
That's always dangerous.
Yeah. But it's an amazing book. So it's 13 steps to
Evil.
evil, and
Yep.
then 10 steps to you all these
Hero.
numbers, Sasha.
I know.
Tell them
I know.
about
Why do
your
I do
books,
that?
because I'm screwing them up.
Why do I do that to writers? Yeah, 13 steps to evil, how to craft a super bad villain, I think it is. 10 steps to hero, how to craft a kick-ass protagonist. And then there's the side characters, and then there's the anatomy of prose and the anatomy of a bestseller.
All absolutely amazing. If you want more of Sasha. But before we start wrapping this up, Sasha, I know you're working hard this month, but are you reading or watching anything that you are just like in love with?
So what have I read and loved? Do you know, and I'm gonna butcher her name and it's really embarrassing. Anna Huang?
Oh,
Yeah, that's
Huang.
right. That's her name.
Okay, I just read Twisted Love. That's the first book I read this year.
Oh,
Oh my god, I
really?
loved it. I loved it. And then I was like, God damn it. And then I like slipped into the bookstore and came out with all of the rest of the series. And I was like, oh. But yeah, I don't normally read like the whole series, but then I realized it was all the other characters and I was like, that sucked me. And so I loved that. I'm just about to start Brother's Son on Netflix, which is like an Asian kind of assassin series.
I just started that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm doing a rewatch of John Wick because
Why
love
not?
it. Yeah.
The first 30 minutes of John Wick it needs to be taught.
Oh, it is just exceptional. Oh, and the other one, I just finished Katie Roberts' new book, and I love everything that comes out of that woman's fingers. She's amazing.
She can do some dubcon and like make you know
Oh.
that you want it, even though I'm like, no, I did not ask for this.
Oh, you have to tell me afterwards which ones to read. I feel safe in her hands when I read her books. Like I know she's
that is a compliment.
Yeah, I feel safe with her. So that's why, or I think they're now them. Maybe it's Katie's and them now.
No, it's she's
She, they, I think.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not sure of that. I'm not.
Yeah,
sure
I think Katie is now she, they. Anyway, I feel safe with their books, so that's why I read them.
What about you, Les?
I just finished Kelly Armstrong's A Rip Through Time, which is this really interesting time travel mystery. It's not a romance, although it's the beginning of a series, and it might be a slow burn. But a woman from our time in Scotland, she's Canadian, but she's visiting Edinburgh, and she gets pulled back into 1869, into someone else's body. And so she has to pretend to be this maid in this house of a mortician and try to figure out the mystery of how she got there and how she can get back home. And I immediately bought the next book in the series, and Kelly is lovely, and so I'm really excited to continue on that series.
Yay!
And what about you,
did. Kelly Armstrong did one of my favorite. The series I love. The book was cool. The book with I always get it wrong. The Canadian werewolves.
Yeah, I don't know the name of that, but I know what you're talking about.
Bitten.
Yes.
The adapted TV series, because I read the book. I'm sorry, Kelly, but I love the TV series a little bit more. They cut out some of the things in the book that I was like, and they amped it up by like 1,000.
Nice.
I really enjoyed that TV series, but I'm reading a nonfiction right now, so you might not be interested in that. But what I'm watching is what I'm calling the new Jason Priestley TV show, even though he's in it for like 2 minutes. There's this new TV show called Wild Cards that just premiered. I love any type of a suspense or heist or like cat and mouse kind of television show or movie. Things like the Thomas Crown Affair, or Shonda Rhimes had the Catch. Was it called The Catch? Where it was like the art heist? I can't remember. But I love anything like that. And there's this new one called Wild Cards, and this time it's the woman who is the thief, and there's a cop who's kind of on probation who is her handler, and Jason Priestley is the dad, and I'm just like, yay. Yes, and it's really fun, really snarky, really fast paced, and I'm enjoying that.
Awesome. Good to hear.
So, Sasha, before we go, make sure and tell people where they can find you, because you have a lot of stuff going on that people can take advantage of if they want to learn more.
So sachablack.co.uk, Sacha with a C, SACHA. My Rebel Author podcast, or I'm like, yeah, everything else is just Ruby Rowe, ROE, not ROW. TikTok, Instagram, all of that stuff there. Yeah.
She's everywhere. So you guys can and she narrates her own audiobook, so I felt like I was having a conversation with her as I was listening to the villain book. It's absolutely fascinating.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. And
I really feel like I need to do a second edition these days. There's so much more I could add in.
You should. There's so much more to talk about. And Leslie and I will happily be your beta readers. You're welcome. So thank you again, Sacha, for hanging out with us. And thank you guys so much for joining us. And please let us know what you think. You can leave a comment on YouTube with your thoughts on this episode. You can share this episode with a friend who loves romance. And please don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
And you can always check out our book schedule on our website, inkandmagic.net, so that you can read along with us as we continue to go through the Side Changeling series by Nalini Singh. And we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.